Hola, hola. Now we're doing part two of my presentation. So in part two, I'm going to compare the fall scores of the students who have taken Spanish for 7 years, who took Spanish for 7 years, to the spring scores of students who started with me with 0 years of Spanish. This is going to tell us where they stand after 1 year of learning under the strategies mentioned and described in part one. So 1 year, school year versus 7 years of Spanish. And we're going to go through the four skills that were mentioned in part one. So let's start with the hardest skill and the most important skill in language acquisition, which is interpersonal listening and speaking. We talked about how this is the hardest one because there's no time for you to translate into English for comprehension. When you take the AAPPL exam, they ask you a question and you have to answer it quickly. And students must stay in the language in order to perform, in order to succeed. So there's that time issue, understanding, and just being in the language. That's why it's the hardest. So the students who have taken Spanish for 7 years, I had 14 students, and 10 of them were from here, La Jolla Country Day, and four from other schools. Now we're going to look at the results of the students who had Spanish for 7 years. So only two achieved intermediate low, which is I1 after 7 years. That's an increase of 15%. Again, it takes about 4 to 6 years to achieve intermediate levels. Now we are going to look at the same skill, but for this group is the group that has the zero, that came to me with 0 years of Spanish. So very normal when we see the black scores, the black graph, those are the fall scores. So 9 students were in novice, 0 were in intermediate, and in spring 3 are now in intermediate. So 3 made it to move to intermediate. That's 43% increase. Now let's compare it with the students who had Spanish for 7 years. After 7 years, only 15 made it to intermediate levels, and 43% made it to intermediate levels with the methodologies that I described in part one. And this achievement was only achieved in 1 year. Now let's look at the listening skill. This is the second most important skill in language acquisition. We need to listen to the language in order to produce the language, but we need to listen to compelling stories, interesting stories that the kids want to hear, right? Blaine Ray is excellent with that, with his TPR methodology. If there's a lot of listening, the byproduct is writing and reading and speaking. So the students who took Spanish for 7 years, two of them made it to intermediate levels. The rest were in novice high and novice mid. So that's an increase of 14% of students moving to intermediate levels. Let's look at the students who had 0 years of Spanish. After 3 weeks, they fall in novice 2 and novice 3. And in the fall, post-test shows that only 2 remained in novice and 6 are now in intermediate levels. That's an increase of 75% of students moving to intermediate levels. Compared to the students who have been taking Spanish for 7 years, 14, only 2 were in intermediate after 7 years, and 6 made it to intermediate levels after 1 year out of 8 students, correct? Now, for writing again, we talked about it grows out of listening. If you could listen, you could write. We have to hear the language before we could produce it, before we speak, before we write, before we read. We have to listen to the language. So the students who had 7 years of Spanish, 7, half and half. And the students that had 0 years of Spanish, most of them fall in novice levels, right? And the post-test shows that 5 moved into intermediate levels. So that's an increase of 63% of students moving into intermediate levels. One did not take it. That's why we divided it by 8. And compared to the 7 years of Spanish students, that was an increase of 50% moving to intermediate levels. And 63 of the students that had no Spanish prior, 63 of them moved into intermediate Spanish, intermediate writing only in 1 year. This progress has been achieved in just 1 year. That's pretty amazing. For reading, we have 50-50. We said the reading was the easiest skill to achieve since when we read, we could translate in our heads. We have more time to monitor the language and figure out words and context. Many of the students can passively read in their second language, but not speak the language. You could pass a grammar test and get an A plus, but you cannot go to Mexico and be in a restaurant and actually have a conversation or even order your food in Spanish because you did not practice the speaking. So for reading, you have one student out of the 8 that somehow he made it to intermediate. I know some kids were reading since day one. They asked for books, so maybe that's the explanation why one of them is in intermediate 1. And 6 of the students moved because one was already there, so 6 moved to intermediate levels. That's an increase of 75% of the students moving into intermediate levels. Let's compare that with 7 years. That's 50%. That's the distribution after 7 years, and this is the distribution after 1 year. This says a lot. Language is learned through stories and listening to the language in a natural way. Now, let's look at also and appreciate the progress of students who took Spanish for 7 years, right? So when they came to me to an intermediate, and then when they left my class, only 4 were a novice. The rest moved to intermediate. See, the graph did grow for them too. For writing, 7 were in novice, and only 2 were left in novice at the end of the school year. You could see the graphs switching to the right, shifting to the right. And many of them, not many, but yes, many of them, 7, are in intermediate high. Again, this is type A of the test, which means that you could only go all the way. The highest score you could get is I4, and 3 of them got I4. So there is tremendous progress for the 7 year, for the students who took it for 7 years. Listening. Um, you have 2 that were in intermediate when they came to me after 7 years, and then you have only 3 that were in novice. The rest moved. The graph is woo. The orange graph is much more evident that many of them moved to intermediate. I could do percentages here, but we're focused on the 0 years compared to the 7 years, right? So reading, again, only 1 was left in novice after 1 year of this storytelling, Crash and Blaine, and the acquisition method. Only 1 was left in novice for reading. So we could conclude, and I'd love to replicate this study, that the students who had 0 years of Spanish outperformed those who had 7 years of Spanish in all categories. After 7 years, we could conclude that traditional teaching, when you do that, the progress is very limited. When I come to the classroom, my vision is for students to experience the language. So that's why it made sense for me to read Krashen. It made sense for me to listen to Blaine Ray, because you have to really experience and read. I also read John Dewey. It all makes sense. It's my language, my culture, and my passion. So reading about these big guru people in language acquisition, it just made sense to me. It's not a dead language. We should not be studying a very lively language that is spoken in San Diego, California, that we're only miles away from Tijuana. We should not be doing worksheets, textbooks, or a way that we used to teach languages, how we used to teach Latin a long time ago. We should do real communication. So who inspired me? Again, Stephen Krashen, Blaine Ray, John Dewey, John Dewey's work and language conferences. All this led to student center, deskless storytelling, and it changed my teaching. And I would like to replicate. I would like to replicate this study to see if the results are consistent, to see if I could get consistent results. I have the formula to do it. I can also share this process with other teachers so they could test the effectiveness of their own strategies. So in conclusion, this is the message. We have to reconsider what we are doing and how we are doing it. We have to test our strategies and consider what's more effective for our middle schoolers. And I conclude with that. Thank you very much for listening.